So obviously a multi-chain world is, it's not in the future, it's really in the present. There are 15 blockchains today that store about 10 billion in assets each, and overall about 100 blockchains or public blockchains out there. Like the reality is that the universe will always tend towards entropy, and there will be more and more blockchains. And this is why layer 2 solutions and other scalability solutions and bridges all became pretty abundant. And this panel is about this. So we have an amazing group of people here with us today. I'll let you all introduce yourself. Austin, why don't we start with you? Austin Federa, Head of Communications in Solana, a great partner of Coti and Uncaged Studios.
Yeah, great to be here. So I'm Austin Federa. I run communications for Solana Labs. I'm also one of the founding advisors for Metaplex, which is the protocol that runs, manages, and the DAO that controls the NFT standard spec on Solana. So did a bunch of work in the early days on the architecture of that. Some pretty significant design changes from the ERC 721 spec and the Ethereum NFT spec. Small things like creator royalties built right into the NFTs and sort of leveraging on-chain data in new ways. I also work pretty closely with the Wormhole team, which has done both asset bridging, message bridging, and NFT bridging as part of what that supports as well.
Amazing, and we'll get a lot into this later.
My name is Oren Langberg. I'm the head of marketing at Monkey League, part of Uncaged Studios. Monkey League is the first AAA game to launch on Solana. And essentially we are pioneering a new era of Web3 gaming where it's a play-first mentality where a huge focus is placed on high quality and high production value gaming as well as the earning aspect and really building sustainable economies for the future of gaming.
All right, can you hear me? Yes. So hello, I'm Gabriel. I'm a core developer from Cartesi. And what we do at Cartesi is a optimistic rollup solution, which means we are not a blockchain. We are actually built on top of other blockchains, and also means that we are blockchain agnostic. Now, like other blockchain, like other rollups, we offer a solution for blockchain scalability. Unlike other rollups, we offer developers a real computer, like the ones we use every day. And this allows developers to leverage things like real operating systems and mainstream programming languages, which is really meaningful. So that's the power of Cartesi. And it has some quite nice consequences for the future of NFTs.
Hey everyone, my name is Erick LaPaglia. I am an advisor and an investor in the Web3 space. I'm also the co-founder of a conference called Miami NFT that was a couple of weeks ago. Great to be here.
Thank you. Myself, my name is Shahaf Geffen, based out of Tel Aviv. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coti, Layer 1, that launched back at 2017 when it wasn't that popular. It was also the first money in Uncaged Studio. I'm pretty excited to be here. So without further ado, let's dive into a few topics. We'll have some time for questions and hopefully answers afterwards, so feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so let's start from the basic. It's an open question. I'll let everybody get to this. But what are the new features and use cases for users and developers that can emerge from bridging NFTs between layers?
I think it's liquidity and it's access to capital. So many of these projects, depending, especially if they're not on a primary chain like an Ethereum or a Solana, they really have difficulty getting traction. And so as we have interoperability and we see more chains, that honestly are agnostic. Like I see all of these chains as various countries that are cropping up and they're grabbing land share and they're getting user base. But the problem is I can't easily as an end user take my things and stuff in between them. And so interoperability is really those airlines that allow us to do that seamlessly. And I'm happy to pay whatever transaction or travel charge to get there. I just want the same functionality. I want the same, I want the same utility on my NFTs or my avatars that I would have. And that to me is the linchpin moment. Like when we have that, I think you'll see new capital come into the space. I think certainly new users come into the space because right now it's a friction issue. Like you melt most people's minds when you explain what you have to do to have things go cross-chain currently. And so the easier it is for that, for soccer mom in Iowa to be able to do that, that's a seminal moment for us.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the whole idea of a bridge or a cross-chain NFT ecosystem is still really in the early days, and that's partially because we use NFTs as like a synonymous term for art or representation of some sort of art-based ownership on the blockchain, right? And whether that's a character in a game, whether that's an actual piece of like one-of-one art, that's just one implementation of the technology stack, and we're just seeing like the rest of like DeFi start to catch up to it. So there's a few groups now that are doing different kinds of financial products represented as NFTs. The most classic example would be a mortgage, right? That is a very that is not a comparable asset. You have to have a definition of it's this property, it's this loan, it's this sort of thing. And so you're starting to see more of those sorts of things come into play. And I think when you start seeing the financialization of NFTs, that's where you're going to see a lot more gained by moving between different layers or different blockchain ecosystems. One of the things I found fascinating is Wormhole launched an NFT bridge. And technologically, it was one of like the first that existed. It was the ability to move back and forth between Solana and Ethereum. And almost no one used it. It was incredibly underutilized, even though the cost of moving from one to another was quite low if you're going from Ethereum to Solana, right? You only have to pay gas on one side of that transaction. But and you saw this represented on OpenSea too, where the Solana NFTs have actually been available on OpenSea for several months. But they were available as a wrapped asset, right? You were taking the Solana NFT, maybe a Degen Ape or something, and you were sending it over the Wormhole bridge, and it would appear as a native Ethereum NFT. No one wanted to buy them. So you don't see that with wrapped ETH or wrapped Bitcoin or wrapped Terra or something like that. You see UST. You see a real comparability there between the assets. But for whatever reason, NFTs, like, since we have them conceived as the idea of like an original piece of artwork, somehow wrapping it feels like you're like taking a photo or hiring someone to like copy the Mona Lisa or something in a way that wrapping a Bitcoin or wrapping an Ethereum doesn't. So I think the market's still really figuring out what does it actually mean to have authenticity represented across chain as opposed to asset backing represented across chain.
I think that's super on point and super interesting. It's probably like part psychological, as you said, and then it's also part technological as well, because it is pretty hard for someone to buy, let's say, a Monkey Gen 0 NFT, and then it let's say gets wrapped. It's hard to kind of verify originally that was the original NFT. And I mean, for game companies, Bridges is huge, right? There's so much use cases there, obviously, and for a game like Monkey League that has the potential to reach such a wide audience, right? Soccer game, high production value, really awesome NFTs. Bridging between networks just allows us and other projects to reach a much wider audience, right? So your point makes total sense. And as soon as we're at the cusp of things right now, as soon as technology really starts to evolve and get better, and we do a good job in the messaging too, right, as marketing and communications, I think we'll definitely get there. And it's going to be sooner than we think, right? Because things are really advancing at a rapid pace. I mean, 7 months ago, probably half the people didn't even know what the wrapping was, right? So definitely.
And the cross-gen comparison is really interesting there too. So if you look at like video games in the traditional world, cross-gen play is like a very controversial topic. Everyone basically uses Azure as the backend now to enable like an Xbox to talk to a PlayStation 5, to talk to like a Windows computer. You can see the same thing, really the messaging component of that integrating really strongly as games also bridge blockchains.
Yeah, so from a technical point of view, I think that the advantages of bridging assets around chains, or layers actually, has to do that different layers have different profiles, and that can be advantageous depending on the depth you're running. So the most pressing issue on layer ones right now are high costs. So usually the narrative is a little bit like this. You have these very expensive dApps that are running on, say, Ethereum, and we move them as is to the faster roll-ups, for example. And I think we can do a little bit better than exactly what we've been doing before, only faster. And we should. So what we do at Cartesi is we, as I said, we offer this very fast computer, but also a computer which allows developers to tap into this very rich ecosystem that already exists. So when I say ecosystem, I mean things like operating system and mainstream programming languages and libraries, frameworks, databases, which we've been developing for the past 50 years, only to throw it all away because none of it can run on a blockchain. And if we can run dApps with the full support of an operating system, it changes everything, right? Because if you look at NFTs, it's in a little bit of a pickle because it's not fully decentralized, right? So the ownership is decentralized, but the logic around it not always is decentralized. So it does us no good to have decentralized NFTs, but have your metaverse running on someone else's centralized data center. But as soon as we have this powerful computer, it changes everything. You know, we can actually put the logic around NFTs inside the layer one. So I think this is why we should start looking at other layers, because we can have faster computers, but also computers like the ones we use every day. And we cannot fulfill the promises of blockchains if we don't offer those two properties.
Asta made a great point, though. Honestly, the real linchpin is going to be more use cases. It is great that this art-driven sandbox is where we're currently at with NFTs, but ultimately, I feel, and I would imagine these fine fellows will agree, 95, 98, 99% of this stuff will probably be worthless in the course and fullness of time. But what it will prove out is the smart contracting functionality. And so you talked about property. You disagree, and maybe it's going to be a high number. It might not be that, but it's going to be an incredibly high number because I've got a myriad of reasons that I would say that. But if you look at real estate, and in the United States specifically, that's an incredibly decentralized industry. And so everything is municipality by municipality. And so as blockchain is adopted in that industry, my hallucination is that you'll probably have 50 different blockchains representing the United States property market alone. And there's going to have to be interoperability because otherwise transactions, if I'm in New York and I'm buying a property in California, it's going to be an ever-loving nightmare.
We'll get into provenance in a second, so think about this. But two insights that, first of all, liquidity sticks, right? If you launch a token on a certain exchange and you then launch it even on a bigger exchange, usually the liquidity will stick with the first one because that's habits, and we are creatures of habits in many ways. So I think with NFTs, it's not a big surprise. I think with Monkey League, you guys launched on Magic Eden. I think even with OpenSea, when you launch, you'll see that Magic Eden, and OpenSea is huge, right? But you'll still see that Magic Eden, I think, will have the greater liquidity because that's habit. And then there is, the chain itself is sometimes part of the message and the ethos, right? And it's like, my kids used to play in PlayStation and then moved to PC, and I just bought a PlayStation shirt and said, I don't play on PlayStation anymore. Like, why would you buy me that? So that's part of it, right? I do not want to move from Solana to Ethereum, even though, there may be other platforms, because this is part of the ethos. I'm a Solana DJ, this is where my NFTs are. So I think that would be part of it, and there needs to be a very convincing use case so people will actually use these bridges. And with that in mind, how do you, and I'm not sure that's even possible now, but how do you solve provenance? I can verify my NFT on Solana, for instance, Gen Zero Monkey. When it moves and being wrapped on Ethereum, how do you solve provenance? How do you verify that it's the same piece of art?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times this comes down to more of a UX issue than a technological issue, right? And the same thing is true for wrapped assets. The challenge becomes for example, Etherscan does not understand what a wrapped Solana NFT looks like, right? And that's a product change that can happen. From a technical standpoint, anyone can hit up the right sources to figure out oh yes, this was signed by the creator address on Solana, it was moved over via decentralized bridge, it was minted on Ethereum, but that's not great, right? And like you see this in the real world where like mortgage insurance in the United States makes absolutely no sense. Title insurance makes no sense. It's like, oh, we're buying this property, but like the government doesn't actually know if the property belongs to the person we thought it did. And on the off chance that it doesn't, like you got to buy some insurance in case actually it's owned by someone totally different, right? So that's an issue where it's not specific to like NFTs. It's much more in the real world, but the UX of using anything that moves data across layers is that you're creating obfuscation in that process. And this is where like in the asset world, like Chainalysis, TRM, like all those folks have really, the technology has caught up with the ability to, you know, make sure like if you're Grayscale and you're trying to buy a Bitcoin, you can be sure that Bitcoin address has never been involved in anything nefarious that might come back at you as a publicly traded institution. We're probably a few years away from that same tracing and data availability being available for cross-chain NFTs, but I don't see any reason why we're not going to get there in the future.
Yeah, so UX is definitely a huge problem, but I think there is also a technical issue with that related to security. Because when you start bridging assets around and you create these wrapped assets, you, in a way, inherit the security model of the base layers you're bridging around. So for example, suppose you have like bridge between Ethereum and Solana, you move some assets from Ethereum to Solana, you create this wrapped asset, but now Ethereum gets attacked in some way. It suffers a 51% attack. And it can, for example, rewrite the full history of Ethereum. And now it's trouble, right? You don't know the provenance anymore of the NFT, or the asset. So I think there's also this very large technical issue, which even if you have the safest bridge, you know, even if we have it decentralized and all the properties we want, we're still subjected to the security model, the safety model of the base layers.
Okay, so maybe it's now time to focus a bit on the future. So let's start maybe with Solana. What are your plans for the future in terms of bridges, NFTs, and everything around that?
Yeah, so the Solana NFT landscape did not exist this time last year. The Metaplex spec was basically launched in about June. There was pretty much no adoption until August, where you saw, you know, in July there's 120 NFTs in total on Solana. At this point, it's past 8 million. Yeah, and so there's you can find these great charts. Chain Crunch has some great charts, just exponential with the number of NFTs existing.
Just draw a line up.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even look like a graph at this point. It just looks like a COVID chart at this point. But what that means is the whole landscape's really, really new. So there's one of the really interesting things about building a spec from the ground up, having the advantage of NFTs having existed for 3 years now, is you can do things like incorporate creator royalties directly into the NFT spec. That's not something that exists on Ethereum because NFTs weren't conceived to function that way, right? There's just a gentleman's agreement between all the marketplaces that we're going to honor creator royalties, but there's no on-chain enforcement for that type of stuff. So that's one of the pieces you start to see about like ideas of on-chain collections, where there are unique identifiers as part of like a 1 of 10,000 drop that says that it's all collected into the same group. We're starting to see some really cool stuff like escrowless listing, where you can actually mint to an on-chain program. Well, once you've minted to an on-chain program, you can publish to an on-chain program that says, hey, I want to sell this Degen Ape, this Monkey League NFT. And then OpenSea can tie into that, Magic Eden can tie into that. All these different marketplaces can tie into it, and so you have like an MLS-style database on the blockchain where the markets are now competing on UX, user experience, maybe token incentives, you know, something along those lines, as opposed to competing on fractured liquidity pools. And this is really like, I think I don't mean consolidation, but sort of the interoperability of various liquidity pools for NFTs is going to be really important. You see this all the time where like an NFT spikes in one market and people go to another market and they're like, oh, the floor is 20 SOL lower here. I'm going to buy it from this market and arbitrage it over. That's great for some people, but really that's an incredibly capital inefficient market. And so we've kind of done all this stuff on DeFi already, right? We're just sort of like the NFT idea is catching up. There's fractalization of NFTs coming as well. In terms of the costing, I think NFTs on Solana, it's about $3 or $4 to mint one. That's probably still 100x more than I'd like it to be. So there's a lot of technological changes that are coming to push that cost even lower down to meet the needs of something like a game where every in-game item wants to be an NFT. $3 or $4 is very cheap for a $69 million Beeple, but it's pretty expensive for just like an item or something like that.
And with that in mind, maybe with Metaplex as well, new version for candy machines, something in the horizon.
Yeah, well, I mean, the candy machine's super fun. There's a lot of different tooling that now has been built on the Metaplex protocol to enable different kinds of minting schemes. So instead of having sort of like a first in money system where you just try and hit up an IDO minting contract, there's this idea of candy machine that you can do pre-sale tokens or reward people for being in the Discord early or something like that, and that'll give them access to a mint. So a lot of the stuff that's really interesting about that is it's trying to level the playing field and also be able to reward people who are like early members of the community, not just people who are willing to pay really high fees to make sure their transaction's first in the order of the queue. So there's a lot of like, I would say in DeFi, we don't really have an idea of fairness. Like it's a financial market. Like if you can ARP someone, like you should do it, right? If you can snipe a liquidation, like you're gonna do it and pay $10,000 for that transaction on Ethereum because you're gonna make $500,000 in liquidation. There's something with NFTs that feels like you need to keep things more fair. And so Candy Machine's an attempt to really bring that into that back into scope, where someone who's new to NFTs and it's the first time buying something, they don't have any advantage over someone who's running, you know, a professional NFT arbitrage operation.
We're definitely looking and exploring at the potential for a solid bridge to other networks. As I mentioned before, Monkey League, we really have the potential for such a wide market, and we've talked about how people have this certain culture around different networks, the ethos, right? So as technologies start to evolve and as like we're able to kind of have more use cases, NFTs in the last year alone have exploded. So as the demand for these wormholes, as the demand for the bridges increases, there's going to be a lot more uses in it, and a lot more improvements, and we'll be able to also solve the issue of provenance and things like that. But I think it's only good for the industry as a whole, being able to access other ecosystems, being able to get the word out to other networks and other groups of people that are really hardcore around different networks. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely hopeful for that.
When Monkey League on OpenSea, sir?
Monkey League on OpenSea in the coming days, I would imagine. That's for sure. We've been kind of inducted into their beta on Solana. Great move, guys. And
we didn't do anything for that. That was all them.
Oh, they hit you guys hard. They were like, but definitely our community is going crazy over it, and they like that interoperability between projects and ecosystems across different networks. So I think it's good for everyone, right? And there's a lot of different projects out there, but it's essentially survival of the fittest, right? So the ones that really kind of push the limits and push the boundaries and take risks and be brave and make the kind of headway, these are the projects like Monkey League that are really going to stand out and have these kind of solutions for the community.
I mean, that's the point, though. You talked about it. It's messaging and it's marketing. Right now, 85% of all economic activity for NFTs is on Ethereum, and hopefully that changes and levels out, but it is right now. And that's an industry that in 20 was $25 million. In 21, it was just short of $25 billion. And it's anticipated to be well north of $100 billion this year. And so someone needs to come in from a messaging standpoint and say, hey, we're here, we're cool. Because the other thing that we didn't bring up, you brought up OpenSea. OpenSea doesn't even have 1 million wallets at this point. And so when Coinbase comes in with 8 million people on their allow list, like that's going to be a paradigm shift for the industry. And so that's very, very interesting. And then what we're not talking about is, Zuckerberg announcing at South by Southwest that Instagram is going to get into NFTs, and some of these larger brands, a YouTube getting into NFTs. Like those are paradigm shifts. And so what chain they utilize is probably going to be a driver of where this conversation goes from there. And part and parcel, it's going to force interoperability, because if an 800-pound gorilla, or monkey in this case, comes into the industry, they're probably going to drive the conversation as well.
Yeah, just kind of on that topic of moving things between layers too. Like when someone like an Instagram / Meta / whatever we're calling them now comes in and wants to do something like that, undoubtedly they want to support multiple blockchains. I really like the model that like USDC has, or where there's a native USDC on Ethereum, there's a native USDC on Solana, there's a native USDC on a bunch of different chains. USDC.cool is actually a really nice visualization of where all the USDC is deployed. It feels like there's a really big place for someone to come in and solve the cross-chain native mint solution in a decentralized way. There's got to be folks working on it, but like I really like the idea that if I wanted to move my degen ape from Ethereum or from Solana to Ethereum, it doesn't have to be a wrapped asset. That we could have basically proof of destruction on one side and proof of remint on the other. No one's remotely there from a technological standpoint, but I think we're going to see that sort of idea that like provenance is socially constructed and technologically constructed coming into play more over the next year or two as the technology stack gets mature enough for that.
Yeah, so we absolutely want to have native assets in each blockchain, right? We don't want to have wrapped them around, yeah. So on integration between layers, in the context of rollups, that's not an issue. So the base layer and the rollup solution are very tightly integrated. So you can move assets from one to the other and back with no need to, there's no centralization issue. You don't need permission, special permission whatsoever. And I guess this is one of the reasons why rollups, the community is very excited about rollups. And some I may say something that goes a little bit against the grain here. So we are talking about like having this cross-chain ecosystem. And I think that perhaps another approach is, yes, having multiple chains, but maybe having them more isolated. Because if the rollups solve the same issues that we go cross-chain to solve, maybe we don't need to hop between layers. And then we don't have this decentralization issue. And this is meaningful because we're talking about like decentralized bridges and safe bridges. And even if we have a very decentralized and safe bridge, as we talked before, we still have this issue of compromising the base layer itself. And so the thing becomes as strong as the weakest link, and the weakest link can be quite weak. So that's my fear.
Yeah, it's funny because like, how many of you remember that old XKCD comic, which is like, we have 12 standards, this is crazy, let's make one standard to rule them all, and then 13 standards is the outcome of that. I think what we've seen is like fragmentation is inevitable. And so like as much as I would love to see a solution where like everyone could just agree like, oh, let's just do it this way, I mean, good luck. I really hope it works. I'm just skeptical that we can get to a world where that is the outcome.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have like a single blockchain. I think we're going to have multiple of them. Yeah. But I think that perhaps it will be more like feuds, more like condensed.
It's probably like the survival of the fittest all around, right? You have maybe 15, 20 different blockchains now, maybe 30, 40, but in 50 years, maybe it's only 3 or 4 that actually survive.
Yeah.
Same thing with NFT projects, same thing with play and earn games. I mean, and that's the essence of blockchain, right? It's, you don't get involved, you don't interfere, and it's true, pure survival of the fittest.
I don't even think that's just blockchain. I think that's technology. That always seems to happen. Yeah.
Always reminds me of the Monty Python part where they say, we are all individuals. I'm not. So it's kind of like that. So with that in mind, let's segue a bit to bridges and then finalize. So in light of the recent, Axie Ronin bridge hack, I think we had like a full-blown intro here. Yeah. We'd just love to hear, the risks around centralized bridges and decentralized bridges as we've seen them recently. There is always, the obvious, but what else do you see these days? Maybe Gabriel.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm going to repeat. So I think that. Since with rollups, and I'm not talking about like a single one to rule them all, perhaps multiple and running on different base layers, we may see more of a shift in that direction. So it's less about like integration between different chains and more like chains becoming self-contained and using different rollup solutions to fill in their needs. So I guess that's more like my prediction. So maybe not think so much about integrating different chains.
Understood. What risks do you see, Erick, with the compromise between either picking a centralized solution and being exposed to custodian risks, maybe, or a decentralized solution and being exposed to other types of risks?
I mean, I know it flies in the face of what we are all building, but centralized seems at least the path for right now. Who knows where we go 5 years down the road? I always look from, like, these guys are deep in the space. I certainly am, but I look from an audience standpoint. Like, who are the users and what's the friction? What's the pain point? That's why I think Coinbase is going to be massive. I've seen what the user experience looks like. It's 2 clicks. It's easy. It's simple. And you can pay with your credit card. And when you look at what OpenSea is currently, or even Magic Eden and some of these other marketplaces, it's not as, seamless. It's not as easy. And so for me, I look at where can you get attention and where can you get traction. And so a marketplace like that coming into the space that's centralized in nature, that to me is the future, and that's where I think these land grabs are going to happen. Now, where we go from that, from a security standpoint, and how that ultimately plays out, I think decentralized will ultimately be our future. But there's not a great solution for that. And nobody, I mean, we've got, 3 prominent minds in the space and then us 2 knuckleheads. These guys aren't going to be able to agree, let alone, a plurality of people. And so right now, I think we're going to stay fractionalized and very fragmented.
Well, I think it also has to do with, what type of company you are, right? So like, right now we're still at the very beginning of, all the bridge technologies really developing. We're really at the cusp of these things. And so, you really have to choose between reliability or really trust, right? And as a game studio, we also have a responsibility to the game, right? To the project as a whole, to the studio, right? So we definitely, depending on whether you're a DeFi project or a GameFi project, you probably have different considerations that you need to take. Maybe it's a mixture of both, right? So, you really need to have that reliability as a game to be able to make those transactions constantly, and you really need to have the trust that you can maintain this kind of ecosystem in your game economy going without something that recently happened to Axie.
Yeah, I mean, you roll back the clock a while, and the idea of buying something online felt very scary.
Yeah.
The idea of getting in a random stranger's car that you just saw a license plate on your phone felt very weird when it started, right? And now it's like everyone uses Uber or Lyft or some equivalent of ride-sharing technology. Like, that's a paradigm change that society had to catch up to, and there were some safety tools that had to be built and all those sorts of things. I think that, to the Coinbase analogy right now about how do we make NFTs easier, you see places like MoonPay being able to change the on-ramping to crypto. Like, they have a whole service that basically helps celebrities buy NFTs, right? It's like a white glove service to buy a Bored Ape or something like that. And all of that tech, the same way Uber started with black cars and now is you can get a bicycle on it, right? Everything, you either eat up or you eat down the technology stack and the market size. And I think we're going to see over the next few years that the financial technology underpinning the onboarding is really the blocker here. There's UX issues with getting a wallet and what is, there's social consensus recovery mechanisms that are starting to come into place where you can create your own basically friend multisig. And so if you forget your private keys, if 4 out of 5 of your friends are yep, this person forgot it, you can do recovery through some systems now. But in the US at least, the financial infrastructure is terrible, right? You can't text someone and pay them through a bank-to-bank transfer still. You have to, even if you're using Zelle or one of those techs, it's still all clearing through Fed Clearinghouse for ACH. And so once those rails start to be either built around or rebuilt, either through some sort of CBDC initiative or just honestly more and more transactions moving onto blockchain and even something like using USDC, the process of buying an NFT and getting involved in this ecosystem is going to get easier and easier. The same way that if you didn't have a credit card, it was really hard to buy something online. It still is today. But now we've just gotten to a place where that base layer of financial literacy is higher about how to interact with something on the internet. I remember when PayPal used to be really scary, and now it's scary for a different reason. But it used to be you thought you were going to get money stolen when you used PayPal. So for me, a lot of the UX problems solve themselves once the financial onboarding and offboarding is solved, not because they're inherently solved by that, but because there become stronger financial incentives to solve those problems, like the Amazon one-click buy button.
You make a great point, though. What Ivan and Halsey have done at MoonPay, like with their concierge service, was out of necessity because a lot of these celebrities couldn't figure it out of their own accord. And then their NFT platform, I mean, that's an integration product to 160 countries. And so I think that can be a paradigm shift, not necessarily for the big players, for the smaller players. And so to be able to have, and in case you don't know what it is, it's the ability to buy an NFT with your credit card, and it's agnostic of whatever chain. It's interoperable with the platform, and so it's an amazing product.
Yeah. So with Coti, Coti has built its own layer one and then built its own bridge to Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain. What we'll be seeing this year is Bridge 2.0, so a new version of Coti Bridge that will add 2 new ports. One is to the Cardano ecosystem because of JED, the stablecoin that Coti means, and then probably to Solana, as well as the next obvious port. So we'll see that with Coti. We have some time for questions. I see we've attracted a lot of audience since we started. I hear that nobody is going
I blame
to
Austin
other,
for that.
Panels. Everybody's moving here. Yes, please.
Hi there. Hi, this is a question for Austin. So I think we were talking before about bridging across platforms really by means of wrapping tokens, and I think you kind of alluded to the idea of minting on multiple platforms and so forth. Just sort of a question for you. Have you kind of looked into, or what do you think of the Layer 0 technology, which I think is going to be integrating with Solana soon? They've done a few test transactions of issuing an NFT on 3 or 4 or 5 different chains. There's only one that's sort of the real one, and then there's a messaging protocol to burn it and move from one to another. What do you think about that versus sort of the wrapping approach, and which one do you think is going to be successful in the future?
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things that people very often miss when they look at bridges, whether it's Layer 0 or Wormhole, is that the key there is cross-chain messaging. It's enabling smart contracts on different blockchains to communicate with each other, and you can use zero-knowledge proofs as part of that to enable those messagings to be secure and untampered with, even if you're using a decentralized bridge. So I think that really, like as you're saying, that is the future, the ability to have communication between various smart contracts, whether that's, so Uniswap can balance liquidity pools on multiple instances of Uniswap on multiple chains, or whether that's so you can, do a burn and mint of an NFT and remint it on multiple chains to make it, provable in provenance from that perspective. I imagine that asset wrapping, I would hope that asset wrapping is not the dominant form by this time next year. I imagine it's going to be a slow transition as people become comfortable with it. But yes, I do think messaging is going to be the dominant future.
So there was another question.
Yeah, hello. So my question is more about interoperability. So basically today we don't even have interoperability between different platforms. So for example, if you buy an NFT on Rarible and then you transfer it to OpenSea, it won't even take the metadata from the collection you bought most of the time. And right now we are talking about an interoperability between different blockchains. And so for example, how can you transfer, for example, all the volume for collections, because that's what we are looking at. And today, even between platforms, it's not possible. So how can we do this between different blockchains?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a token spec problem. You look at something like the Solana spec; it includes much more on-chain data than you see in other platform specs. It's just a rev process. Give it time. I'm sure you'll see something similar on Ethereum. There's probably an ERC proposal out there our EIP proposal, now we call them, to bring more complete metadata onto chain. Other chains are looking at doing that too. But I'm sure at some point there's going to be something cool that happens on another chain that the Metaplex team has to update their on-chain spec to support that data too. But yeah.
So just be ready because you will go in.
Any other questions? Yes. All right. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. I think this was very interesting, and we'll definitely follow up. Seems like you guys have a lot to catch up on. Thank you, everybody, for participating, coming in so early at the day. It shows resilience. Thank you.